Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
This is your time. This is your call to arms. For the Cryptid Connection is your voice. I'm your host, Jennifer.
And I'm your host, Stephen. Welcome to Cryptid Connection.
The Cryptid Connection podcast is brought to you by CryptidConnection.com, a website dedicated to you, one who has interest in all things cryptid and paranormal. CC is a place where you can enjoy a hassle-free lifestyle and community of Bigfoot pursuit. Stop by via the internet and visit. Guarantee you will start to feel at home. CryptidConnection.com.
Hey everybody, this episode we're going to celebrate a little bit. We just passed a milestone in the life of this podcast. We literally just surpassed 11,000 complete views of our show. Now that's not 11,000 people individually checking out the show or starting it up listening for a little bit. No, this is specifically 11,000 people who have over 11,000 times listened to our show for a minimum of 45 minutes, which is the majority of a show. This is one of those metrics that they measure things in. And most of the time, 2 out of 3 listeners, they will maybe listen 5-10 minutes, something like that. They'll skip through. They'll get a Cliff Notes version, and then they take off. 1 out of 3 people, they'll listen to pretty much the whole show. And it's that 1 out of 3 people that we're celebrating today, because some of you out there are crazy enough to actually listen to the whole show. Anyway, we have a contest to celebrate this. We're going to give away 2 prizes tonight. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break into the podcast at random points, and I'm going to give you some instructions, and I'm going to give you a code word, and I need you to follow those instructions. And if you are the correct person and you respond in the correct way, you're going to get a prize. And this is our way of saying thank you for having actually stuck through the podcast with us and listening to our shows. Alrighty, and now on with the show with Mr. Jim Whitehead. Hey everybody, this episode we've got Jim Whitehead, a biologist and researcher out of Central Oklahoma. Jim, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Thank you for coming and talking with us. Would you please introduce yourself to the audience, Jim?
Sure. My name is Jim Whitehead. I am a Bigfoot researcher with Mid-America Bigfoot Research Center. I am also a member of the Arkansas Primate Evidence Society. I've been doing research for about 16 years now. And in addition to being a Bigfoot researcher, as you all mentioned, I am a biologist. I was trained as a wildlife biologist, and I've done some stuff with the Oklahoma Academy of Science and the Oklahoma Biological Survey. So if you ever get into some of those collections at some point, you might see my name on some of the specimens in the collections at the universities.
Cool. Let's go into the obvious elephant in the room first. Let's talk about your Bigfoot stuff, because that's what half of the people want to know about. Can you tell us a little bit, what got you involved and what your history is?
Well, I've always kind of had an interest in the subject. When I was a kid, I grew up kind of in a tiny, tiny town, and we would watch Legend of Boggy Creek. And I would hear my dad go on to tell me after we'd watched it, we got one of those things around here, too. And I grew up hearing stories of other sightings in the area. My brother had a sighting, Dad and a couple of his coon hunting buddies, they had an encounter. And like I said, I knew of other ones. I always had an interest in it, but I kind of relegated it to folklore until 2006 when I had an encounter with something on my own property, and there's nobody else down there, so somebody hoaxing is kind of out of the question. And I found 15-inch barefoot tracks down in the creek. And in that, I couldn't call myself a biologist and just kind of let it go. So after that, I started getting into it, and I've had a couple of sightings, and it's just kind of been going on and on ever since.
Jim, how do you use your biological, let's call it, expertise in regards to your Bigfoot research? Do you have a specific technique that you could share with us? What kind of equipment do you use, for example?
Well, I tend to be rather low-tech. My biology background, I was pretty much a boots-on-the-ground field biologist. I was one of those guys they would call in when they were doing a biological survey of an area, and we would go in and do a species tally, or we would try to collect specimens. So a lot of mine is more practical knowledge on kind of the environment, tracking, species behavior, things like that. So whenever I get into Bigfoot research, what I will generally do is try to look for the travel routes between resources and then start building on that.
Yeah, if I were to go back to school, I think I would be interested in animal behavior, because I find that a fascinating field in regards to biology.
Oh, it is.
So how have you been able, I guess over the years, do you feel like you've made any progress in being able to apply those things to the research for Bigfoot?
Well, maybe a little, but I mean, ultimately, there's no experts in this. Even though we do have some people out there with degrees that are in it, but I've got a research site that's had over 60 sightings in it.
Is that a public site?
No, it's actually on private property.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Oh,
yes.
It's divided between 3 different areas of private property.
You can tell she's used to the... I'm sorry. You can tell she's used to the internet, because I think she instantly thought you were talking about a website.
Yep.
But what I was going to get at is there's actually a creek system that connects them, and you got one big chunk of woods on one side, one big chunk of woods on the other, and they're using that creek system. And if you wanted to have a sighting in that area, that's the place to go.
And that's had sustained activity over the years?
Oh, yes.
Well, that's interesting. Have you pulled tracks or hair, anything like that out of it? Or are you running audio?
I'm not so much of an audio guy. We've got other members in the group that are. I am more of a footprint analysis / tracker guy. And yeah, we do have tracks from that area. We do have hair from that area. There was one time a few years back, I had actually saw one run across the road at night, and it had to duck under a willow branch that was low hanging over the road to get to the other side. And when it did, it slid down a rocky embankment. And I went back the next day. First thing I did was measure the willow branch. and it was right at 9 feet. So whatever had the duck to get under that branch was a little taller.
Mm.
And it actually had slid down a rocky embankment to get to the creek. Instead of taking the trail down, it was a hurry. And on those rocks, I pulled quite a bit of hair. There's a group out of Texas, in Louisiana. They're called Texas Cryptid Research. They were up in northern Oklahoma, and they collected some hair samples a while back. And one of the members actually sent me some of the hair. Their hair sample had been analyzed in 3 different labs. Basically, the general reaction was, we don't know what this was, but we like more. Nobody could identify it. And they did send it off for genetic testing, and the results said it was not found in the zoobank, which means it's an undocumented species.
Really? But you actually had one that they said they couldn't find a match to. They didn't just go to either contaminated or error over to human then.
Interesting.
Yeah, this was Texas sample. The sample they gave me, however, when I compared the hairs that I pulled out of that encounter, where the thing ran across the road, to the hair they gave me, whatever their unknown is, my unknown is. It had the same morphology, same scale pattern, same hair diameter. The only difference was coloration.
Now, I'm trying to remember, but if I remember right, possible Bigfoot hair does not have a cortex. Am I correct?
Actually, that's not a great characteristic to use. The medulla is present in mammalian hair. When it disappears, it's actually an age characteristic. The hair turns brittle, the medulla dries up, and the hair snaps off. And you can actually go to the FBI's forensic website, and it'll tell you the exact same thing.
Right.
They can take 10 hairs off of any human's head, and they guarantee you 4 or 5 of them are not going to have a medulla.
Okay.
Just due to the age of the hair.
Oh.
What I actually had found was the hair was very similar to, in structure, to human pubic hair, but it was, number one, it wasn't cut. And it was 9 to 10 inches in length.
Okay.
And the samples both Texla and I had did definitely have a medulla. But like I said, I think it's because they were both probably fresh hairs that were tore off a creature that was running and not an old hair that just snapped off.
Okay. Now, when you said they were torn off the creature, was the root included? Did it pull it by the root, or did the hair snap?
Some of the hairs had roots, some of the hairs snapped. And something else that came out of that research site, there was I've lost it since then because I lost power for 2 weeks and the sample got degraded to the point it was not worth keeping. But there was a sighting of a juvenile in a tree, and the next day, one of the stock panels on the creek had actually been pushed down, and there was a fresh tree break about 7 feet up. And on that tree break, there was actually some dried blood, like something had cut itself on the stock panel. And I did the initial analysis on myself and confirmed it was mammalian blood, but I could not get a geneticist to look at it. I used every resource I had trying to get a geneticist to look at it.
Mm.
That
really sucks.
Mm-hmm. It not only wasn't that they didn't want to look at it, they didn't want to get near the sample. There's such a
Oh.
stigma in the academic community about it.
Mm.
Did you, I'm assuming you told them what you thought it was then? Or did you try to go at it blind and just say, can you identify this? Or
Well, it's not that much of a secret what I did in my hobby, so it wasn't hard to
okay.
figure out.
Yeah. But now that's interesting in its own right, because, again, it goes back to there being a stigma in the community, in the scientific community. And so it makes things hard to even get a good look at. And so, all right.
And
no, go ahead.
I was just going to add that the stigma, it's almost to the point of absurdity, because I know for a fact there are members of the academic community, biologists that have been out in the field that have had encounters. I know some of them that are actually fairly high-ranking, members of the said academic community that have literally had face-to-face encounters with these things.
But they'll still keep it a secret. They don't want to risk their standing or anything like that.
Right.
That goes a long way to explaining why this thing is still supposedly a mystery, too. So,
yeah. To quote what Dr. Bindernagel once said, it's not that science has missed the Sasquatch. Science is deliberately avoiding it.
Very apt quote.
yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So could you tell me what a typical expedition or field research would look like to you? Do you like to go out and do you stay out there, or do you drop a couple of items to, I know you said you didn't use recordings, but could you just describe a typical research expedition for yourself?
Well, I don't use recordings, but we have other members that do. And I'm trying to get into the habit of putting recorders out, but I am horrible with audio. That's why I leave it to guys like Randy Savig and Larry Parts. But typically what we'll do is we'll try to organize a small outing where we'll have 4 or 5 people get together, and we will have a base camp, and I will find an area that I think is a very potential hotspot, and I tend to go about it a little differently than most. I don't necessarily hit the Bigfoot sites up when I'm trying to find a new area. I'll use what I call alternative sources. One of the things I'll do is I'll look into, the paranormal sighting report threads. And I'm not saying these things are paranormal, but it's been my experience in areas with activity. A lot of times, these things are out in the woods and they'll get to screwing with people, and especially when you get closer to the urban centers, people will think they've got ghosts. And these are really easy to find too. When you go into these different paranormal websites, you'll find people talking about, we were out in the woods on said road, and we saw red eyes and then looking at us, or heard branches being broke, or shadowy figures running through the woods, or screams, rocks being thrown. I mean, it's just stereotypical Bigfoot stuff, but to them it's ghosts, which brings in an interesting argument that there's a psychological element to what people are reporting. But that's a whole other thing in and of itself. And what I will do after I found an area where I see enough of this stuff being reported over and over, I'll organize an expedition to go in there and kind of check it out, just to scout it out. And if it looks good, we'll have a major expedition where we have the base camp and the small group. Typically what we'll do, since I'm well aware of the fact you're not going to sneak up on these things in the woods, is we will go out and set out listening posts where we'll have 4 or 5 people sitting across from each other, and they can watch each other's backs. We try to get a thermal out there with them, And a lot of times, the thermals are a relatively new addition. A lot of times if we have activity, though, somebody will see something moving in the background. And usually when we go back to camp and turn in, that's where the fun starts.
Hey, everybody. I'm going to interrupt the show right here. We're going to give away our first prize, which is a lantern. This is a beautiful lantern. We use this same model lantern out in the field all the time. One of the favorite features I like about it is not only does it have 3 different levels of brightness with white, but it also has 3 different levels of brightness with red. It's waterproof. The batteries are fairly long lasting. You can get 72 hours or so, maybe more, out of one set of batteries continuous. It's a good thing. So what I want you to do is I want you to email me at insider@cryptidconnection.com. That's insider@cryptidconnection.com. If you'll email me, I'm going to choose the 5th person that emails me, not the first. I'm going to choose the 5th. And that person will win this prize. And I'll reach out to you, and we're going to make arrangements to ship this out to you. These lanterns are really awesome lanterns. We had stocked up on several of them because we were going to sell them at our booth at the Southeast Texas Bigfoot Conference. However, since that conference is on hold and pretty much canceled for the season, it looks like, we're going to start giving this stuff away. We have a few other items, too, that will be going on later in the show. However, if you want that lantern, go ahead and email me at insider@cryptidconnection.com, and we'll see if you get to be the right person. All right, now I'm back with the show. Jim, is there anything that your effort or research has revealed that you think is generally unique? I don't want to say literally, can you tell us something that no one else knows? That's not what I'm looking at. But maybe, have you been able to find any aspects or anything that you think may not be the most well-known, or something that really has stood out to you that you don't think most people consider?
Well, obviously, for me, one of our research areas is right on the edge of an urban center. And again, going back to what I just said, we found that by looking at the, people reporting things like we were out camping and the ghost came up and stole my ham out of my icebox and ran off with it. We'd been there, and we've basically been monitoring this area up until about 2 years ago. And these things, you don't have to go miles out in the countryside, because I honestly think that just like you see with deer and bears and a lot of other animals, they start figuring out that humans equal food. And a lot of these urban centers, I think, honestly, may have troops living right on the edge of it, and people are none the wiser. And as for a little bit of information that we seem to have found out, as far as something I don't think is that commonly known, I've got a pretty good idea of their growth rate. Now, I can't say 100% that I'm right, but based on the sightings in that area that's had 60 plus encounters, not the urban center area, but the footprints we've seen, there was what appeared to be a set of twins that kept getting seen. And based on the footprints and the sightings, we were able to kind of figure out the growth rate on them. When they were first seen, they were probably about maybe 35 to 40 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
They were the size of toddlers. over 6 to 7 years, we steadily would find those smaller footprints getting larger and larger and larger, and we would find the sightings of these two individuals getting bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point where I kind of came to the conclusion after crunching the numbers that these things probably hit full size at about 13 years.
So did you cast the tracks of these twins?
Yes, some of them.
So you have like a growth chart, so to speak, of these particular individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Aw. I'm sorry,
and
go ahead.
What was interesting is, as these two were growing up, based on the data, we started finding signs of another baby, or another young one, about 2-3 years later, and it started following the same line.
Huh.
So, and I was talking to some of the other members of some of the other groups, like the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, and they seem to have reached the same conclusion based on data in their areas.
So did you also map out where you found the footprints, like on a map, just to see if you could follow it, like a trail, for example?
Oh, yeah. In fact, my primary research area, we think we had the travel route on them mapped out. There was one individual, aside from the twins, that really stood out. It seemed to be an older individual, kind of a silverback color.
Mm-hmm.
And he would get reported. And we would actually use him to plot the sightings to figure out kind of their range.
Mm-hmm.
And we came up with roughly a 500 square mile range, which sounds like a lot, but it's essentially the equivalent of one county, even though it's not in a particular county.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's only, 25 by 25 miles?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we had, it was getting to the point where when they would show up in the area we call Mushroom Gully, down in the bottoms, if there was activity there, we would expect to get a phone call from a guy that was about 10 miles away at the end of the week. And it seemed to take about 4 weeks to do the complete circuit.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't what you would expect for a migratory animal. It was what you would expect for an animal patrolling a territory.
Oh.
Now, that was going to bring up my next question. Were they present in the region year-round, or did they tend to be seasonal?
Most of the sightings were reported in the fall, winter, and early spring, but I think that's got more to do with the amount of foliage.
Okay.
Kind of harder to see into the woods, number one. Number two, it gets a lot hotter in the summertime, and I think these things were becoming active much later.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, we did notice that there was a slight seasonal shift in the sightings. During the summer months, they would shift closer to the Washita River, which has a clay bottom, very rarely goes dry. During the winter months, it would shift more, a little bit closer to the Canadian River, which, again, I'm suspecting probably has to do with available resources.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, because the Canadian River actually has went dry quite a few times in the summertime. So,
Jim, you know the area that you're looking in. What is the possible food sources that you think these animals might be using?
well, there's multiple. Basically, I think these things are taking advantage of any available food source they can get hold of. Most of Oklahoma does have big omnivores in it in the form of pigs or bears. In fact, in 2011, I did firmly establish with Oklahoma Fish and Game that there are black bear indigenous to that part of the state.
Really?
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah. In fact, it was on one of the things they had me on. The thing was actually written up in a newspaper out of Sulphur that there are indeed black bear in the mountains after I brought in bear tracks and scat and scratchings during one of their events.
Okay.
So, but black bears and pigs, again, are large omnivores. As a general rule of thumb, just about anything they can eat, a human could eat, and I'm assuming that would also apply to a Bigfoot, mainly due to the fact that, again, these things are big omnivores. But that being said, there's a lot of man-made resources available to them, too. Obviously, there's trash.
Mm-hmm.
Roadkill, that's another thing I've noticed, is most of the sightings are right along the roads where you see a lot of deer kill. And I think, honestly, what they're doing is they're getting on one side of the fence row and kind of hunkering down by the brush and going down the road looking for roadkill.
Scavenging.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's easy. That's high-calorie meat. It's there. You see a truck hit a deer, wait until the truck leaves and go out and grab the deer.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that being said, there's a town to the south of us, and there's a Pizza Hut right on the edge of town. Right on the other side of that Pizza Hut, there's a watershed pond with a fence separating them. And just on the other side of that watershed pond was the gentleman that I would say would call us within about a week of them being over in Mushroom Gully. And we were convinced what they were doing is at night they were going down and raiding the Pizza Hut dumpster.
Yum.
Well, there's no cameras there, and something kept knocking the fence down. It was just a cheap wooden fence, and like I said, about every 4 or 5 weeks, something would come through and knock it down, and finally they just put up one of those little flexible rubber mesh orange fences just to kind of have something there.
It was minimizing the damage.
Yeah.
So I guess not only Ninja Turtles like pizza, huh?
Well, something seemed to like it because it kept getting in there.
Jim, has there been any developments that you can share that have happened maybe in the last year or so?
Well, to be honest, I've kind of been, as far as Bigfoot research goes, I've been kind of on a dry spell. I've been focusing more on a book that I've been working on for Oklahoma cryptozoology, which I feel needs to be written because there's a lot of very interesting stories and things reported in this state.
Now, Jim, I understand that your interest isn't solely just in Bigfoot, that you have been tracking other animals and other reports, and I think you're writing a book about that. Am I right? Could you tell us a little bit about that right now?
Yeah, I've got a black book of other things that were reported to me over the years that, because obviously when somebody finds out you're interested in Bigfoot, they're going to say, well, I've never seen one of those, but I saw something else weird. And I went ahead and kept track of what all was reported. And there's some very interesting things. And over the years, I've accumulated enough of this, both through looking through historical archives and personal accounts, that I really felt this needed to be shared. And that's what I've been working on right now, is this book about general cryptozoology in Oklahoma. It's not going to be primarily, not that there isn't going to be a section on Bigfoot, but there's going to be a lot of other stuff in there. There's at least 3 or 4 other cryptids that I've personally investigated that I think there may be something to, and there's a few that if I can find a rational explanation for it, I will. In fact, there was one that I pretty sure I hit the nail on the head. There was what was, back in the 40s, there was what was called the demon bass of the Grand Lakes, which was Grand Lake of the Cherokees. There were people reporting seeing this huge black fish that looked like a largemouth bass. Mm-hmm. And whatever it wasn't a joke because it put a guy in the hospital. Oh. He was fishing, and he was reeling a fish, and this fish came up and snagged his catch. And when he tried to reel it in, the bigger fish that had now swallowed the fish that caught his bait, the fish turned around and charged him and knocked him off his feet. And when it swam away, it actually wrapped the line around his leg and it cut into the flesh of his leg.
Ooh,
again,
ouch.
This is back in the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy had to go to the hospital and get stitches. But they called it the demon bass because it looked like a giant largemouth bass, some 6 feet in length. Now, obviously, it's not a largemouth bass because they don't get that big. Mm-hmm. So it's something that looks like a largemouth bass. And come to find out, in the later part of the 19th century, the aquarium hobby had really taken off, which to me strongly suggested this was an introduced species that got stuck in the river, and when they made the lake, when they dammed it up, it got stuck in the lake. And when I got to looking at popular aquarium fish of that time, I found a very probable candidate in the form of the Murray cod from Australia, which if you look at the Murray cod, it's an extremely aggressive fish, and they can grow up to 5-6 feet in length and 150 pounds. And they look exactly like a largemouth bass that's been pumped up to a giant size. Everything fits. So I think the demon bass was actually a Murray cod that outgrew its aquarium and somebody dumped it in the river.
They didn't want to take care of it anymore, just like those alligators in the New York sewers. Huh.
All right. This brings in a golden opportunity. I'm going to say we should play the quiz now and see how he does. And then, because I have a feeling that's going to open up a whole bunch of other topics as far as the show goes.
Okay.
So I apologize now, Jim, but we're going to have to torture you a little bit here. So Jennifer has a little quiz that she likes to ask all the guests. Jennifer, would you please go ahead?
So, Jim, I have a quiz here. It's called the Quick Cryptid Connection Query. And what it is a list of cryptids. And I'm going to say the names, and I'd like you to respond yay if you've heard of them, nay if you haven't or don't believe, or say what if you think I am just making stuff up. In this list, I have 3 Easter eggs. One of them is a Bigfoot-type cousin. One of them is a former cryptid, now known scientifically proven creature. And the third would be a cryptid from your own location area, the great state of Oklahoma. Would you like to play my game, Jim?
Sure.
Okay, let's get going. Fish taco.
I'm assuming only at a vendor.
Ban Manish.
Nay. I'm going to say nay, but there might have been something to it historically.
Fiddle spider.
Could you repeat that?
Fiddle spider.
Fiddle spider.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go what the, because I've never heard of that one.
Spindlehorn.
That's another one I'm not aware of.
Orang Bati.
I'm going to say nay.
Skellies.
What was that again?
Skellies.
Oh, yowie. I'm going to say yay on that one.
Phoenix.
Nay.
Wasco.
I'm going to go with what the. I haven't heard of that one.
Hagwai.
That's a good one, Juicy.
Thank you. Hagwai.
Nay.
Kumtarangi.
I'm going to go with nay on that one, too.
All right, that concludes the list of cryptids. Do you have any idea what the 3 Easter eggs might have been?
Well, I know what the yowie was.
I'm sorry, Jim. I apologize. I didn't say yowie. It was skelly.
Oh.
Skelly. Skellies. Skellies.
Oh,
I
okay.
apologize.
Yeah, I know what those are.
Okay. So what are they?
Well, the skillies are what the Cherokee refer to Bigfoot in the... well, actually, it's generally any bad thing in the woods, but over the years it's became equivalent to Bigfoot in the Ozarks.
Okay. Let's see. What's the former known cryptid?
Honestly, I don't remember what all you asked.
That's a common problem.
I can go through the list real quick if you like.
No, that's all right.
Okay, so the Banmanish was my cryptid creature, ape-like creature. It's from Bangladesh.
Okay.
And what I researched on the Skellies, it is Cherokee, but it's a 3 feet tall human form covered in fur. So I didn't technically think that was more Bigfooty than, because Bigfoot's a large creature.
It's just a junior
Bigfoot. I know. So I see where you're coming from, and it's local to you. So it's more, I'm gonna bow down to you on that one. You win that round. The spindlehorn, or Asian unicorn, is an elusive bovine that lives in the forest of Vietnam and Laos.
I know what you're talking about now. I've just never heard it referred to by that name.
This woman unfairly uses some ungodly bowel of the internet to find some of these names. I've still never understood it. I
make it fun.
I just want to say for the record, honestly, I thought everybody hated the quizzes. And we actually stopped doing them from a couple episodes and got a lot of guff from a lot of our listeners because they weren't there anymore. So, that being said...
Well, thank you for playing my game, Jim. You're a good sport.
Well, like I said, some of the local names I may not know, but then again, you run into that in biology, too. Because you can go to Florida and people will be mentioning gophers there, and they are not talking about little furry mammals.
What are they talking about?
Salamanders.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Huh.
That's one of the reasons that science uses the binomial system.
That makes very good sense to use the binomial system then, because I'm from Vermont and we called gopher little furry rodent things. That's what we knew them as.
We do here too.
Exactly.
But like I said, it's the common name thing can get confusing in times when you've got 16 common names over a region for the same critter.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but we've got to remember, we're talking about the same area that is notorious for Florida man. I mean, It's just, it's
To be
Florida.
fair, Oklahoma man could probably give him a run for his money.
All right, so now that Jennifer has tortured you with the quiz, now I feel safe that we can go into and actually talk about some of these cryptids that you have researched. I understand specifically that you are really fascinated with the walking catfish. Am I using the right name for that?
Yeah, that's been an interesting thing. Probably because one of my areas that I specialized in was herpetology, and I've done work with salamanders in the past with behavioral research on them. And before he passed away, my dad had told me one time of stories of what he called walking catfish that lived in the rivers. And I had thought nothing of it until I talked with a friend's dad a few years later. And he was down on the Washita River, and he told me he ran into a walking catfish just after a flash flood. And basically some water was flowing across this road, and he was driving an oil field truck down there and seen something going across the road, and he got out and went out and checked it out, and he thought it was what he thought was it was a big flathead catfish. And he's thinking, ooh, fish. But he goes down there, and this thing snaps at him, and he's sitting there looking at it, and it's not a catfish at all. He says it's got 4 legs, and it's got the typical gills on the side of the head, like a water dog, which is what they call larval salamanders in this region, except it's 3 feet long, maybe a little longer. And since then, I have talked to other people that have fished in the Red, the Washita, the Salt Fork of the Red, basically the rivers in southern Oklahoma. And they have also had encounters with this thing. There was a couple of teenagers that were down off the Red River by Waurika, and they were down there, and it had just been a flash flood, which seems to be when these things get reported. But they were feeding some ducks on the river when something grabbed one of the ducks and took it under the water.
Wait, so how big do you think these are?
They are reportedly up to about 4 feet.
Oh.
So there is no salamander in Oklahoma that is anywhere close to that size.
Wow.
Is the closest thing to anything like that going to be the hellbender?
Yes, and there actually are some of those in Oklahoma. For a long time, there was only one report of a hellbender in Oklahoma, and that was one that was caught in Miami, Oklahoma in the 70s. Mm-hmm. But recently they found there's a stream system that they're kind of keeping the name covertly classified in the Ozarks and Adair County that has them in it too. But this is not a hellbender. The witnesses I have talked to are describing essentially what's called a mole salamander, what people around here commonly think of as tiger salamanders or spotted salamanders, stuff like that. Uh-huh. But a larval one that stays aquatic, well, I say stays aquatic. I've got a report from Southwest Texas of somebody keeping one in a horse trough until it outgrew it and then transformed.
Ooh.
And then it crawled off. But anyway, it seems to be aligning with that group.
Wow. You have to get a specimen and actually classify it, learn a little bit more about it. So it eats ducks. That's fascinating.
Well, there's also a lot of Indian legends about it. A lot of stories from the Kiowa, the Caddo, the Wichita. they have stories about what they call water monsters. In fact, the Kiowa word for it, which I can't pronounce, so I'm not even going to try, basically translates into horned water lizard.
Mm.
And a lot of the folklorists think that they're trying to describe alligators. In the Washita River, not too far from where I'm at right now, there's actually a story from the Caddo about a woman that was washing her newborn baby in the water, and this is from the turn of the century.
Okay.
Basically, they said one of these things swam up and snatched the baby.
Oh, how horrifying.
And again, that's just a legend, but you have to stop and wonder.
Yeah, because legends are usually based on an actual event of some sort.
Right.
What other kinds of cryptids can you tell us are supposedly haunting Oklahoma?
Oh, there's a lot. I have also taken quite a few extremely credible reports of what locally are referred to as tie snakes. They're referred to as tie snakes because they're about the color of a railroad tie, and they're about as thick as a railroad tie. One of them was a former board member for the Oklahoma Academy of Science who said he's seen a 18-foot snake in one of the waterways around here.
Wow.
Is the idea that it's a constrictor?
Yeah, that's exactly what he said it was. He said it looked like an anaconda, but it was a different color.
Okay.
And that's honestly what I think the tie snake is. We get these reports all across the American South in the waterways of a huge constrictor. I think it's a North American relative of the anaconda or some other constrictor that has taken that niche. Most people aren't aware of this, but during the Ice Ages, even though it was the Ice Age, the American South was dang near tropical. There were giant tortoises wandering around in Texas and Florida and Georgia. So the idea that there could have been giant constrictors with them is not that far out of the question.
Mm-hmm.
So, another cryptid that I've kind of been interested in is the Thunderbird. I've taken quite a few sighting reports of those, and I think there may be something legitimately to them since the witnesses are all describing the same thing. I took, let's see, there was a sighting report from the Wichita Mountains of a woman that seen one perched on a telephone pole, and she said from the tip of its beak to its tail, it was probably about 8 feet in length.
Too big.
And another guy I was talking with told me a story about how over in the Granite area back in the 60s, they said the game warden used to complain about seeing condors there all the time. And he said that as a boy, you'd see them roosting up there, and he said, they're the size of a man. The body-wise, anyway, if not a little bigger.
Now, the way they're described, the morphology, is it that they look similar to a condor, or is that just being used as a size reference?
Similar to a condor and as the size, if not bigger. Now, one of the more interesting little pieces of the Thunderbird puzzle that I was presented with was there was a witness that they were camped out in the mountains in southeast Oklahoma. And down at Broken Bow Lake, in the early morning, they said they seen this huge bird on the shoreline getting a drink of water. And they said it took off, and they described this thing as having a wingspan of around 17 feet. And when it took off, it left footprints in the mud. and they had taken some photos.
Oh, okay. Huh.
Well, I say mud, it was kind of gravel and rock, but you could see definite three-toed impressions.
Okay, everybody. It's time for us to go ahead and give away our second prize. This one's going to be a t-shirt that is been commissioned by us specifically for Cryptid Connection and our podcast and website. You're not going to be able to get this t-shirt anywhere else. We were originally going to sell this as a debut at the Southeast Texas Conference. We've got a series of shirts that we are bringing out. However, again, the conference isn't happening right now, and so therefore we're going to give one or two of these things away tonight as celebration on our show. I will put the artwork up as a blog post on the Cryptid Connection website. I will also place the artwork on the Cryptid Connection fan page that is on Facebook. Okay, this is how it's going to work. I want you to email me the code word t-shirt to insider@cryptidconnection.com. Again, that is insider@cryptidconnection.com. The 10th person who responds and sends me the code word t-shirt is going to win this shirt. And I'll notify you if you're the winner, and we will get your sizing and your shipping instructions and everything else, and we will get this shirt off to you. Thank you for listening, and we will continue with the show. Thank you. Okay, Jim. It's the moment of truth. You've been studying cryptids for quite a while.
You've been in and out of the woods.
You've got some miles under your feet. So now we want you to confess. Where'd you screw up?
What's your oops moment?
Yeah, what was your oops moment? What was the dumbest thing you've ever done in relation to cryptids?
Everybody has one. I mistook a strap on my arm for a snake, and I screamed bloody murder in the middle of the night in the dark.
She scared the hell out of 5 men.
Well, probably one of the dumbest things I've ever done. I suffered a catastrophic leg injury right before Darren D.W. Lee got hurt. And basically, for the better part of 2 years, I was having surgeries, and they basically stuck an erector set in my leg to try to fix it. And it's really reduced what I can do in the field to the point where there are a lot of times I'm relegated to base camp, and I really don't like that. But right after this happened, I had an expedition, and we were down in the Arbuckle Mountains, and I was hell-bent on going. So I spent the better part of that expedition in a wheelchair, pushing myself around the mountains. And after it had happened, they said they had to wait a month roughly to reset the leg right due to the amount of damage.
Bigfoot or bust, huh?
Yeah. So the leg wasn't even set. It was just wrapped in it wasn't even a cast. They had it just wrapped in tight wrapping. And, I'm, again, in this wheelchair, doing my darndest to keep from succumbing to pain in the mountains. Yeah, that one was probably stupid.
Well, we're not going to question the intelligence of it, but we're going to give you an A for effort. I mean, that's dedication, man. I'll be perfectly honest with you. That's dedication. So other than that, you didn't walk into a tree or drive off a cliff or do anything like that?
Almost rolled off into a creek one time.
I'm keep waiting for a guest to tell me how they almost shot someone. That's the one I'm waiting on. That one's I'm going to hear. I think it was Danny Perez that came closest to it, because he said he hit someone in the face or something, if I remember right, but I'm not sure.
Now, to be fair, I've been mistaken for a Bigfoot on a couple of occasions, and I've been mistaken for a dead body at least twice.
Ooh, please do tell. Can
Yeah, I
we
was
hear
about to
about
say,
that?
mistaken for a dead body takes
Yes.
talent.
Yes.
Well, that one wasn't actually cryptozoology related, but I was digging up fossils on the shoreline of Lake Texoma, and I found a spot that had a lot of shark's teeth in it, and I was crouched over this boulder, basically digging out the shark's teeth, when all of a sudden I had the state police and the local counties show up on me.
Oh, you're kidding.
In a boat had seen me down there and thought it was a body that had washed up on the shore.
Oh, that's good.
That is funny. Oh, my goodness. Oh.
And basically the same thing happened to me again down there.
Repeat offender.
Has this put your fossil hunting to, like, on hold and everything? I mean, has it made you a little gun shy?
Not really.
Okay.
Well, that was good.
That was good, actually. That's a new one. We haven't had anybody be confused with a dead body yet. I like
that one.
I like that one a lot. Jim, a lot of our questions dance around this, but I'm going to ask you this openly. How has the cryptid lifestyle, for lack of a better term, how has it impacted your life? How have you incorporated it? How have you dealt with it? Has it been awesome? Is it just this curse that you can't escape? I mean, how's it affected you? And how do you incorporate it?
Well, in all honesty, as far as my activities go, it hasn't changed much, because I'd still be out in the woods doing what I was doing if I was doing pure biological research.
Mm-hmm.
But it has hurt my reputation within the academic community, I'm not going to lie. But on the other hand, because a lot of the biologists that I had that worked with in the past know me, and they know that I'm actually very capable at what I'm doing, or at least I was before the leg injuries. I've had a few willing to say that if I ever find something worth it, if I ever get the definitive proof, that they're going to back me on it.
Now that's worth something. That is worth something.
Yeah, I basically have a university that has agreed that if I find something, they are going to support me. So,
but now that the understanding is that's a substantial something. You're going to have to bring back
the head.
Yeah,
a large a large tissue sample at the very least is what they're talking about.
Right. But the fact remains, they said they would be willing to put their campus's credibility on the line for it.
Right.
And that speaks to your credibility.
That does.
Mm-hmm.
Does. That, because they would still be going out on a limb. It didn't matter what the evidence was, to just say, hey, we're presenting this evidence here. That says a lot. And that does.
Mm-hmm.
Is
there anything you want to talk about?
Well, it may not earn me a lot of fans and some of the people that believe in some of the other humanoid cryptids, but there's a definite psychological aspect to it. One of the things I've noticed, and again, I mentioned that we have a silverback Bigfoot in our area. He's kind of this old, crotchety male. He's extremely cranky. We know when it's him when he gets reported. The color pattern's pretty specific. And not too far away, there is a hot spot for dogman sightings, or werewolf sightings, whatever you want to call them. And some of the dogman sightings have reported this same color pattern. And I have to hold on a second. I don't know if y'all can hear this. My dogs are going berserk.
Oh, we can hear it. We heard Dogman came up, and all of a sudden the dogs started barking.
Wonderful timing.
But what I was saying was, when you look at this area, it's historically populated by German immigrants that have only been here since the 20s and 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And they came into this region with stories of, werewolves from the old world. Now, the people that are seeing the Dogman have reported that one of the Dogmen, whatever, has this same color pattern. It's the Bigfoot in my area, and it's only about 20 miles apart.
Huh.
So is the supposition then that you think that we're just having at worst, a misidentification, and that you think they may actually be the same animal?
Well, I think it is the same animal that's being seen.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a Mennonite community nearby too, and they have stories of what they call the Geet Bay, or the Goat Man, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And they've reported seeing the same color pattern there. And I don't believe there's 3 different types of humanoid cryptid in this one confined area. What I honestly think is you have a sighting that lasts for 5-6 seconds, and your brain is struggling to figure out what you saw. And you get these reports from the folklore, from all these different cultures that you grew up with. Well, you may not even be consciously aware of it, but somewhere you pick up that grandma told you about the Goat Man or the werewolf.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere in your mind, that becomes the idea of what you've seen. And I have seen this in other reports. I mentioned that, with a lot of the people that live in the urban environments, they tend to report everything as a ghost. I've got a couple of good case samples. One's from Ada, Wintersmith Park. There were stories of what was called the Hairy Man ghost.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hairy Man ghost is supposed to be this 8-foot tall mountain man that died in the 1800s down there. And there was a group that actually went down there and had a seance to try to summon it, and they were reporting that they had a success, and this is what clued me in on it. These kids were down there, they lit candles, and they started saying that they heard weird noises and had rocks being thrown at them. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, that sounds more Bigfoot than that. And when you go to Wintersmith Park, it's right on the edge of Ada, literally. I mean, you got Wintersmith Park, and then it just goes up into forests and mountains. So I had went down there and found that they were having a fish kill at the lake. Found where they had their seance, which was just below the dam. So I'm thinking, okay, well, if rocks would have been coming here, the fish are there, which something was trying to get to,
mm-hmm.
would have had to come from this direction. And sure enough, I found impressions with toes down in the creek. So that wasn't a ghost.
So the kids were not knowingly blocking the access to their food source.
Right.
Sounds like, yeah. I bet they gave themselves a good scare doing that.
Yeah. Well, they were convinced that they'd summoned this urban legend ghost. And again, it wasn't a ghost. Another case that I love to use is Gator Mountain, Arkansas. There's a wildlife management area there. And there was a guy that was going deer hunting. This guy is really into aliens. He listens to Coast, big on UFOs. Well, he reports that he sees this 10-foot tall gray alien covered in hair cross the road.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says he has missing time. Well, a week later, another guy's going down that same patch. Now he sees these two gray Bigfoot cross the road. Seems pretty obvious that what the first guy saw was the same thing that the second guy saw. But the first guy was so into aliens that became in his mind what he saw. And as far as his missing time goes, I honestly think he fainted.
That's a good
If
possibility.
If you're a big brave deer hunter, are you going to admit you fainted?
I sure wouldn't.
You're not.
I sure would not.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at is with a lot of these cryptid sightings, you have to take things like this into account.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes a lot of sense. It's no big secret in the cryptid community that people oftentimes misidentify what they do see. I mean, a lot of times when we're talking about that, we're thinking, well, you actually saw a bear, or you heard a coyote.
I was going to say, audio is the same aspect.
Really,
you can
really horrible about it.
Yeah.
But you're right. You know, people, if they see something they don't know, they're going to try to fit it into something they understand. That's the way the human mind works. And so what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And you're right. When you stand back and look at the greater area and the greater situation, you see the commonality in the pattern. And so...
And you've got some great examples there of that commonality and pattern.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, and the door swings both ways, because I've honestly I've had campers talk about encountering bears, and I don't think they encountered bears at all.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you a clarifying question. Earlier in the interview, you mentioned that you thought these things were much closer to urban centers at times.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to me, instinctively, when I think of an urban center, I'm going to be thinking of a medium to large city. And I realize that's not necessarily what you're meaning. Is it you're meaning just a small town, just a congregation of people that live together?
No, I'm not.
Oh, well, could you clarify what you mean by urban center?
I'm not going to deliberate the exact area, but we had a research site right on the edge of Oklahoma City. And again, we found it by looking into these paranormal stuff. Everybody was talking about all these ghosts. In fact, one of my cousins was a member of TAPS, the Oklahoma City chapter, and they went out there, and he was telling me they had all this stuff happen. They heard strange, inhuman voices in the woods, mumbling. They had rocks thrown at them, and when you would get on to the paranormal websites and look at what people were reporting, you'd hear stuff like there were hairy, naked people in the bar ditches, or rocks being thrown. There was one guy that said he'd seen a bear run up on all fours and grab a beer bottle and chunk it at him.
Oh, my.
And again, this does not sound like ghosts. This is stereotypical Bigfoot behavior. And a lot of people don't realize in Oklahoma, and it's like this in a lot of other places, they think there's this real gradual transition from urban to the countryside. In a lot of places, that's not the case. There are places where literally you have the edge of town and then you have forest. In this particular location, it's exactly that. It's in between, Oklahoma City and another major town. But when you go in between there, it's just woods, creeks, and not a lot of urban settlement in between. And
kind of like an encroachment upon its territory.
Well, and again, it's not that they were pinned in; they could still get out.
Okay.
But it provides access to a lot of food sources around this area.
Oh, yeah.
there's cafes and stuff not too far from there. There are people always going out to this spot and eating lunch.
And Pizza Huts, I'm sure.
Well, that was a different area, but yeah.
Yeah.
And some of the witnesses were pretty impressive as far as credentials go. There was one group, it was a carload of medical students that were about to become licensed doctors. And they were driving to a party to essentially celebrate their impending graduation from medical school. And they were driving down through here, and they seen one on the side of the road. And all four of them that were in the car drew what they saw. They showed me the pictures of what they drew. And I have no doubt it was Bigfoot. So, but yeah, the fact that they can live right on the edge of your urban centers and seem to be doing that, humans aren't exactly the most observant of species.
Yeah, we've developed the sense of not having to be observant.
Right. There's what I call the not in my backyard syndrome, where people that live in an area tend to think that they know everything there is to know about what's in an area. Deer hunters and scientists are two of the worst offenders, but it affects pretty much anybody in an area. I had a conversation with a deer hunter once about a spot in Oklahoma and that had activity. And he said, well, it can't be in there because I hunt in there and I would have seen it. And I said, so you're there every day? He goes, no, I'm there during deer season. So you're there every day during deer season, 24 hours. Well, no, I'm there on the weekends and I only hunt for, 6-7 hours a day during deer season. So I said, so basically you're there for a couple of hours on a couple of weekends out of the year. That's a lot of time you don't have eyes in those woods. And I kind of made him back up, but this applies with scientists too, and again, other people. And to talk about how inobservant people can be, I was down in the Wichita Mountains one time, and they have a buffalo herd that roams around. And there was a van there, and some people were hiking in the parallel forest, which is a old tree farm they let go to pot. Well, I was in the parallel forest, and I noticed the buffalo herd had moved into the forest. So I'm trying to be extremely quiet because I don't want to get them spooked. And this car with Florida plates and Miami stickers all over the windshield is there. And I hear this family coming back up the trail, and the dad's yelling and cussing at his kids. And I quietly walk up to him and I go, sir, please stop yelling. And he proceeded to try to tell me how the cow ate the cabbage, and I'm trying to get it across to him that he needs to be quiet. And I tell him, I don't want you spooking the herd. And he goes, what herd? They had walked through the herd of buffalo and never saw them.
Oh, wow.
That is how inobservant people can actually be.
Yeah.
Wow. Huh.
That is utterly amazing. It's true.
Yeah,
but you know.
And when you take that into consideration, and then you look at the stories of cryptids being seen right on the edge of town, and suddenly it becomes quite plausible.
Okay. I think we're going to round out the interview. We have one traditional question that we always ask everybody. And this is entirely a get-to-know-you question. There is no wrong answer. There's no nothing. You can answer it just how you want. Jim, what is the monster under your bed?
What gives you the heebie-jeebies?
Honestly, I've seen enough that not a lot in the woods scares me. What scares me are people. That and the fact that I'm honestly worried that a lot of our wild places, the way the people are going about developing it, aren't going to be there for much longer. It kind of tears at me a little bit. The oil field's real big here in Oklahoma, and they're supposed to replant when they go to a site by federal law, but they never do. And they'll go into an area to put up a 5-acre rig site, and they'll clear 250 acres of trees out. And they're doing this all over the state. And I honestly don't know how much longer the forests in this state will be able to hold up under it.
So you're thinking, so you're not seeing any kind of a replanting effort or anything like that actually being applied?
No.
And the woods aren't doing much to actually grow back into the area. They're not seeding in there. You're not seeing it starting to encroach naturally, or.
Well, it'll start, but then they go back in next time they do something on that property, and they'll clear it again.
Okay, so they're keeping it cleared. Any reason why they're clearing so much? I mean, like you mentioned, like a 5-acre property, but they clear 250 acres kind of thing. Any idea why they're clearing that much?
A lot of it's the landowners asking them to do it, thinking they can sell the land for development. A lot of it's people that want more grazing land. And a lot of it's people that honestly just don't like having forests on their land.
I don't get that.
I don't get that either.
That's a surprisingly common attitude amongst a lot of people in western Oklahoma.
I love trees.
As soon as they get land, that's the first thing they do is strip it bare.
They think that it's got to be bare and ready to plant for whatever, or graze or whatever. It's the only way it can be workable land. Am I correct?
Well, if they were farming, but most of them aren't even doing that.
Then why would you want to cut it? If you're not farming and you're not ranching necessarily on it, what's the point?
Future development.
That's the question I've been asking myself for a long time.
That's sad.
That makes no sense.
Well, it sure was a pleasure having you on and learning more about who Jim Whitehead is.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Jim, I want to thank you for taking the time. And thank you for being part of our community. I really do appreciate it.
You are a beneficial member, and we do appreciate it very much. Thank you, sir.
Well, I'm happy to help any way I can.
Okay. Well, Jim, you have a good night.
All right. Have a good one.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Guests of Cryptid Connection are all members of the Cryptid Connection website. Join the community, a safe, secure, and private place for all your paranormal and cryptid pursuits.
Every cowboy, he always misses when he's aiming at the target in his head. And every broken man finds his idle hands grasping at tomorrow's promised land. And I've been thinking about running, and I'll get out on the town just for myself. And that's when I saw her, and she looked right through me. And when I said I do that day, I really do. been thinking about writing, and when I get the first draft back with no red ink, but I've been thinking to do my best work. Yeah, I've gotta leave this town to find my way. And when that plane touched down on that island town, I knew that my life's work was in their hands. So I started digging for wells of water, and I'm a hero in their eyes. It's clear to see. 'Cause every cowboy, he always misses his shot when he's aiming at the target in his head. And every broken man finds his own hand, grasping at tomorrow's promised land. And I've been thinking about the time that I have wasted sitting here. 'Cause I've been thinking that all this thinking is the thing that keeps me further from myself.
The music and soundtrack for the opening is from Epic Film Score by Alex Kaskin. The closing credits are Every Cowboy by Cellophane Sam.